Hi, everyone. My name is Gerard. This is Allison, my ministry partner. And today we're going to talk initially about temperaments. And we're going to get into other components that we talked about in the first podcast. But today it's the beginning is temperaments. And there's melancholy, choleric, sanguine, and phlegmatic. And again, God has made us unique in every way. So we each have certain temperaments that He's placed within us to help each other. So our strength will help somebody else's weaknesses, and their strengths will help our weaknesses. And that's the way God made us for interpersonal relationships. So I think it's really wonderful. And when you look at Psalm 139, 13 through 16, it really describes exactly that he did see us. He formed us in our mother's wombs, and everything from our temperaments, spirit, soul, and body, it's all there. And it's amazing how He created us. So as we go forth, we just want to look into temperaments, and there's three parts of it. It's inclusion, control, and affection. So inclusion is your mental intellect and surface relationships and so forth. Control is how within each relationship, who has the control. And it's not about control as some people would think. It's just about matter of making decisions. Do you want to relinquish, that to another person? Or do you want to work together? Or do you want to be the one making the decision? And then deep affection, for deep personal relationships. And that's where some people get tripped up when you're in that area, based on your temperaments and how you see the other person. That's the key. So we're going to, go further into that. And after that, we're going to talk about adverse childhood experiences, as we mentioned in the first podcast. And we'll just go into a little bit of the trauma aspect. There is complex trauma, as we just alluded to briefly in the other podcast, but that's really something that will take a number of sessions to go through, because you're dealing with more of sexual abuse, physical abuse, trafficking, and things of that nature. And that, again, is what happens for a longer period of time and what that does to your mind. And that's very difficult. So it's a subject that's important to discuss, and we will go really in depth with that. And you just really want to take the time to do that. So that's what we're going to do for that. But right now we're going to get back to temperaments. And with the 5 temperaments, some of them have more of I'm going to give you an example. For melancholy, phlegmatic, for example, melancholy, they're more of a person that has higher intellectual capacity, but they also are more of loners, or somebody who would like to study or do whatever they do, and they're very creative as well. And it's something that they like to be alone, but they do. We all need interpersonal relationships. That's the way God made us, but some like them more than others. Like the sanguine just loves to just go out and be with people and talk to people, and it's so easy for them to do. Where myself being a melancholy, it's not that easy, and I don't really want to do it in some cases. That's all. And again, that goes with for example, your field of employment, or if you start a business or whatever the case may be. You just some people like to deal with computers. Some people like to do accounting, or some people like to be salespeople. So again, the temperament plays a role in that, and why it should play a role in that, because that's where you have the giftings from God to really, be a good, your skill set is very useful for those areas. And once you find that, and how God has placed your gifts in you, and you work with the gift, it's just so much easier. It's just so much more fun. And it's something that I have personally, it's taken me a long time to, understand that, and to really fall into that. So again, the 3 areas are inclusion, control, and deep affection. Do you have any comments on that at the moment?
No, one thing, just, God forms us in the womb, and He knows everything about us, and He knows our temperament. He knows who we are to be, and what we are to do with our gifts and talents. But as we develop,
Sure.
and we get into our families of origin, sometimes those parts of us are not acknowledged, understood,
Right.
and we lose sense of who we really are.
That's so true. I'm just taking a minute here to try to find the scripture for Psalm 139. If I have a chance to do it, I will. Usually when you try to do it in rush, it doesn't quite come up as quickly as I like, but just bear with me, we'll get to it. And it's really important to read it. So everybody can really get a good understanding of it. So let's see, we are Psalm 139. Okay. So this is from the ESV, and I really think this is amazing. For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. So it's pretty evident from our perspective that God really is so creative. It's so wonderful to each of us to allow us to be a part of this wonderful gift of life. So going further, a bit further with the temperaments. Again, when we're dealing with the interpersonal relationships, this is where a lot of people don't know about it. So for deep affection, for example, you might be looking or hearing people speaking and they're really the way they love you, but it's not what you're receiving. You might be looking at them, for example, if you're hearing something from them that you don't think is love, but for them is love. That's where the interpersonal conflict can happen. So we're going to go forward with that too, within our podcast to describe this further. But I just wanted to bring it out there that within these three sections, God has made us, as I mentioned, and we need to get a firm grasp on that too, which we will go into. But as we further, I go further into what we're discussing today, we want to know that we want to explain to you that as God made us this way, things happen. We live in a fallen world. And so when you're dealing with a family relationship or relationships that are extended, you have a tendency to be a part of something that's flawed. And this is where the learned environment of the family dynamic, where people are people and we're not perfect. However, there are adverse childhood experiences that happen as we are younger, and we're dealing with that from our parents who did that to us. Again, it's not blaming them; it's just they didn't know any better, and they learned some things from their parents and so forth. So we go back further. Again, it's not blaming anybody or condemning anybody. It's just how we have to understand how this happens just to make ourselves better. We want to be, as I mentioned before, the best me that we can be. And that's the way God has designed us. So, and when we go a bit further into that, we understand that there are a few areas that are important. So when a baby's born, and I mentioned this last time, we did that from 0 to 3, the brain is 90% formed. But in that time frame, it can be, the growth can be affected. And we'll get into that in greater detail in further podcasts, but this is just an overview. So what happens is, for example, if the baby's looking at their parents and they're getting the response back of if I'm crying or if I feel uncomfortable, if I'm hungry, and they cry and the parents come and take care of the child, then they can say, I'm safe. Okay, so if I cry, I'm going to be taken care of. And that's basically what it is, because obviously they can't converse, but they're understanding the safety of the environment, that they will be taken care of. However, that's not always the case. You have parents that may not understand that, or may deny some things, or just may, because of addictions or whatever else, they just don't attune with the child. And when they do that, what happens with the child, the infant knows that if I do that, I'm not going to be taken care of. I'm by myself, even at that young age. So because of that, their brain forms a bit differently. And they even when they get a little older, they really start to harden their heart. And when you do that, you are just living defensively. So you have the adverse childhood experiences and you bring them forth into your adult life based on what you had to live through. And it's really important to understand that as a child, whatever age that they had to go through these difficulties. And again, that's just one thing about the entombment, but then you also have the lack of attachment pain. But as they go through the difficulties that they're going through within the relationship in childhood, they come out of it with the defensive strategies that we talked about in the first podcast, that they bring into adulthood. And this is where the issues are, that the unprocessed emotions that they have hiding in their heart, that, you know, the unprocessed emotions have to be brought out. The emotions have to be brought out, and they have to learn about these emotions too, so they can work through them. So once you're in that emotion, once you understand all this, you say, okay, something triggered that. You can step back, and then you can deal with it from your own heart, because you're speaking to your heart once you understand all these things. So that's just one part of the building blocks that we're going to be talking about. Do you have any thoughts on what we're mentioning at the moment?
No.
Okay, so when we go further into the childhood development years, from, you know, the baby up until, you know, later teenagers, you also have to understand that because they go through some of these difficulties, it may not be. So one more thing, we'll step back. When you're dealing from 0 to 1 and the attunement's not there, that's when things really happen down the road for the child, because the child doesn't have the confidence that anybody will take care of them. They feel all alone. So that hinders the growth, as I mentioned, of the brain, which also hinders learning, and also hinders interaction with other kids, social settings. So, and that carries on quite a bit. So even if from 0 to 1, they're in a very dysfunctional type of family relationship, even if they go after that, say they're taken out of that environment and put into, say, another family, they still have those issues because of the brain development. And when you go past that, obviously the good news is that they can, you know, work through that, but they have to, there's a lot to it to understand that once they begin the process of understanding that. And then the adult is working with the childhood a defense strategy. So you really literally have a little child in you based on how you decided to, well, not decided, but how you were understanding how to get through the dilemma or the abuse or anything else that you were, or the trauma that you were going through at that time. The second thing I want to point out as well is after that age, so from 0 to 1, and so if the child has a good relationship within that 0 to 1 year, the parent taking care of the child's just needs, you know, their emotional needs and whatever else they need for, you know, feeding and so forth. After the age of 1, if it goes downhill a bit there from the relationship, the parents, if they, you know, begin fighting or if there's some abuse or anything else, they're still able to function much better than a child that goes from 0 to 1. So it's amazing how the brain function and brain growth works and the neurology behind it. And it's fascinating for me. I know Cheryl, it's great as well. So when we go further into that, we're going to, I guess, really kind of give an overview is once you get through the defense mechanism or understand that, we're going to go into the adult side now. And from the adult, what we're doing is we have lived how can I say this? We have lived less of a life than God has planned for us because we just don't know how to deal with relationships. First of all, we might be, and from the defensive strategy of talking or trying to work things out, we may have something where we have shame, and we could have lack of attachment pain and or powerlessness. And one thing I want to mention too, as a child, the child going through these things thinks they're bad because they do not think that their parents are bad. They're rationalizing it. They must be bad because I'm bad. So I'm bad because they cannot look at their parents as doing something wrong because that's their safety. Excuse me. Even if there's trauma there, it's just there, and that's how a child looks at it. So a child really is egocentric, and they take things quite literally as well. So then they also suffer in silence. If they don't understand what the parent is doing, again, they're looking internally that it must be me. So when we go forward into the adult years and we bring, each of us do have adverse childhood experiences one way or another. just think about that. As I said, the first podcast, what we said was that just multiply that by 8 billion people. So we really have to come to grips with what we're understanding here with the dynamic of being human. It's a great term for that. And so being human, understand that we're not perfect, but we can look at how our brain is designed. So we have the prefrontal cortex, and then we have the midbrain, and then we have the limbic, which is your emotions. So the emotions is the back, so midbrain is where your protection is. And your frontal cortex is where you live out of function. So you function through that, which is great. But when you go into the adverse experiences, something might trigger it as an adult. You go right back into emotion. And again, that's where shame, powerlessness, and lack of attachment comes in. And before I go further, I want to see if Allison has anything to say, because I'm talking a lot here. So I apologize.
Well, I'm just thinking about living in a fallen world and how, we all have different experiences in our lives that we've gone through, and we don't even realize so many times. Gerard said we're not living the fullest life that God has for us if we haven't dealt with those things. We don't even realize that we're not living in the fullest of our lives. So I think it's very important for us to understand. I go back to temperament. For me, understanding my temperament, understanding how I function, understanding my strengths helps me, and my weaknesses helps me to work on my weaknesses, but it also helps me to understand other people and how I interact with them or how they interact with me, and not to take it personally. Because what is the first thing we do every time something happens bad in a relationship? The first thought that comes to our mind is typically, what did I do wrong?
Right.
What have I done? And while it's a good question, it's not always that you've done something wrong or that the other person has done something wrong. It's just the way that we communicate and the way that we interact. And so hopefully by understanding our temperaments, we're able to work through those types of things, have stronger relationships with people, understand who we can have better relationships with, and also to work through those adverse childhood experiences, because those are what keep us in childhood, I guess. And so, if somebody doesn't say something the way somebody else wants it said, then they're going to pout. And then, that's real life. That's real life. And so, and then you get mad, or then you withdraw, but all of these things stem from our experiences in our childhood and the way that we have learned as children how to have those defense strategies that you're talking about. And so I'm really happy that we get to talk about this. You are much more well-versed in this than I am, Gerard, but I've learned a lot about it, and I truly believe that bringing that forth to anyone who's listening as we talk about those and how they affect our lives and how they can help our lives will be a very, very strong thing for you and powerful for you. It'll empower you.
Absolutely. That's it's just wonderful how you put that. Thank you, because you kind of brought it back and put it all into a neat format for the people to understand it. And our goal, our heart, is for you to understand this as well, to become the best you. So when we talk about that, I'm going to go back to the temperaments a little bit too. Again, it's our interpersonal relationships and how we see each other. And then that's where the difficulties can come in based on the way we're made. So we'll go further into the temperaments itself, but for example, if choleric is very strong-willed and has the desire to be in control and to do things that they have goals, and when you bring everything, all the temperaments and whatnot, into working for the Lord that has He placed in you, these temperaments, that's where the power of the temperaments come in. So each of us living within our uniqueness is, and we're all working for the kingdom, and that's the wonderful thing about it. And as we go forth with our ministry and or just life in general, it's our goal is to help everybody to be able to communicate better and to live better and understand that to see the other person through empathy and not anything that, not from a defensive posture. Because when we're in a defensive posture, which I have been for most of my life, it doesn't help to have relationships. It doesn't help for friendships. A lot of hurts, and it's not necessary. Because we just truly want to live as Jesus has showed us. He came down to show us how to do this. And we have a perfect example. And I want to communicate that to you. And I know Allison does as well. And this is just amazing for our hearts to be able to do that. I have had some schooling, so I certainly understand that aspect of it as far as adverse childhood experiences, and just, you really truly want to live wholeheartedly, which is a great word. I love that. And that's the way God made us, and He wants us to do that. But again, life is tough and things come at you. But when you have the tools in place to be able to go forward, go right through that, that's great. And for relationships, that's where it's key to be able to look at the other person, not with anger or not with defensiveness, and not looking at the other person and saying, what's wrong with you? We just can step back and say, well, there might be something bothering him, or why is there something that's within me that's making me feel angry, or some of the emotions that are out there. And emotions, as I said before, and we've said, that's the way God made us.
Right.
And you see in the Bible, I've mentioned it before, Jesus was angry and Jesus also wept. So He showed us that it's okay to have emotions, but when we can keep everything in perspective the way God has designed us, that's where life is just a really joyful place to be. So again, we want to bring this to your attention to be able to, how can I say it? I guess be able to start the steps to living better. Any thoughts?
We want you to live wholeheartedly. We want to live wholeheartedly. And these are steps that we've taken in our own lives. And we've had a lot of adverse childhood experiences ourselves. As Gerard said, he's got some schooling in this. I don't have the level of schooling that he does, but I have life experience in this. And I also understand from a biblical standpoint how much God loves us, how He formed us, how He does want us to have that life that He created us to have. And He understands our situations. He looks at our hearts.
Oh, that's a great.
He's not looking so much at what we're doing that is hurting anyone or hurting ourselves, as much as He's looking at our hearts and saying, I love you, I have more for you, and I love you like you are, but I don't want to leave you where you are. So come with me. And that's why we're doing this. We want the same for you.
Well, the journey is the exciting part, to get to the place where you can understand and